Was I praying? Or was I just in between those special moments? Well, hi. Welcome to the Word Cafe live show. Before I do anything today, yes, I will have to welcome you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good everything. How are you doing? I am not asking rhetorically. I'm asking because I really want to know. I'm fine, really fine. Well, you know what? This is that safe space where we come in to lean on one another's experience to forge a positive path. How do we start today? How do we begin today? I have something special to share with you, but I before I go into the day's, what I say, gist, before I came on set, something happened, and I was having an exchange, communication that is with someone in a group. And those words, as we're having them, came rushing in like an inspiration. And I wrote some things down. And I want to read them out to you. Yes, that's how it works with me before we go into the days as in gist. It was about light. Let me read it out to you, then we'll begin. When the menorah displays his beauty, far from the reach of incandescent light, it speaks not in sound, nor whispers in wind. Yet his breath moves through the silence. A pulse we recognize and know. And from this knowing we rise. Understanding settles upon us, not as a lesson learned or thought formed, but as a gift, a grace, his knowledge etched in our souls, transforming through and a thought to wisdom, and wisdom to action. So we stand, vessels of his revealed glory. And all this bow, not by our hands, but by the quiet might of his spirit within us, a power radiant, holy and unseen. It flows, not for our pride, but for our, yes, his light to shine, to be known in and through us, reflecting the fullness of him who gives breath, who makes himself known silently, yet surely. I felt to share this with you before going into the day's activity. So whenever I have discussions with people, there's one thing I do. I listen. I listen for that inspiration from him. And somehow I just tell myself, okay, put it down. It could encourage somebody out there. Well, the menorah. That's a discussion for another day. All right, what are we going to be doing today? History. Yes. I was telling my producer and videographer, one of these days I'll bring him on set so that you guys will see his face and, see how we make things happen. And I said this period or this season on the show, we're going to be looking at so many historical happenings. So I did a record that I think is almost 3 years now, the circle of the earth. If you go on my YouTube page, you're going to see it. I think it's about 3 years. And I talked about how the earth goes through a cycle. And these cycles bring about changes. Human beings come and go. But these changes always happen. And I think from the way I see it, every century, there's a change. Something happens. The Queen, late Queen Elizabeth, She died almost at the turn of another century, if you go look at the history and all of these changes and all that. So when I observe these things, I try to draw meaning from them and also to help my learning and at the same time my living, so I don't play with it. So today I'm going to be looking at a particular date in time that so many things happened on. Few things, I would say. So many things, but out of this so many, we're going to pick out few things that happened and changed how the earth, how we perceive the earth and all of that. 1883. Somebody will wonder why did you call that date 1883? A significant date. So many things happened on the earth, and I'm going to pick out one which affects us in Africa, Nigeria particularly. So yes, we're going to be reading, and in between we're going to be bringing out some, gist and cutting here and there and all of that. I know it's not going to be boring. It's going to be exciting. I know that. 1883. 1883. It was a pivotal year with several key events that impacted the future, globally speaking. And I'm going to give you some of them, but there's this particular one. When I get there, you will know. The eruption of Krakatoa. If you've not heard that word, you're hearing it for the first time. The eruption of Krakatoa, an island volcano in Indonesia, was one of the deadliest and most destructive volcanic events in recorded history. The eruption released immense amounts of ash and gas into the atmosphere, causing global climate effects, including dramatic sunsets and temperatures drops worldwide. This event also led to advancement in the understanding of volcanic activity, and atmospheric science, impacting the fields of geology and meteorology. Completion of the Brooklyn Bridge. The Brooklyn Bridge in New York City opened in May 1883, a groundbreaking engineering marvel of its time. It was the longest suspension bridge at the time and symbolized progress and urbanization in the US and worldwide. The bridge's completion inspired subsequent advancement in civil engineering and infrastructure development globally, reflecting the potential of human innovation in creating transportation networks. Development of electrical lighting. Thomas Edison's progress in the development of electrical lighting continued in 1883, solidifying the shift towards electrification of cities. This year, Edison discovered the Edison effect, which laid the groundwork for electronics, vacuum tubes, and eventually computers. So you see, this discovery would lead to the development of modern electrical grids and power distribution, shaping how societies evolved with technology. All right. So we move to rise of labor movements. Labor movements were gaining traction in 1883. Obviously, when you talk about labor movement, you're talking about the workspace, how work evolved. So particularly in the US and parts of Europe, as workers began advocating for better working conditions, fair wages, and reasonable hours. This period set the foundation for modern labor laws and labor unions, influencing policies related to workers' rights and globally. As in workers' rights globally. Advance in medicine and science. In 1883, several medical discoveries were made, including Robert Koch's identification of the bacterium responsible for cholera. This discovery marked a major milestone in bacteriology and public health, enabling better prevention and treatment of infections or infectious diseases and informing future advancement in epidemiology and public health measures. So this is one great advancement. But listen to this particular one. I think this is where my heart is today. Expansion of European colonialism. The scramble for Africa was underway by 1883, marking a significant period of European imperialism. Colonial powers expanded the control over African territories, reshaping the continent's political, economic, and social landscape. These colonial boundaries influenced future African independent movements and the long-term geopolitical landscape. So before we go on, let me give you this story. I'm from Nigeria, which you know, but I'm from Calabari, the Ijo-speaking tribe in the Niger Delta. And there's this story my grandfather told me, told us, myself and my siblings, which is also there in history. The Calabari kingdom, or land as we want to call it, was moved from its, what we call Elim Calabari, which means old Calabari, the old settlement, to the new settlement in 1884. So you see why I'm particular about that. So when you look at us and you think we don't have a background, we don't have a history, no. If you go to Buguma, for those of you who would love to visit there, when you get to the central square, you're going to see the statue of King Amachree, and underneath it is written 1884. The centenary, whatever, was marked in 1984. It was, the celebration of and all of that. So you see where we're coming from, So, and this is why it's particular to me, and I want to share. So I'm going to give you a background of what happened in 1883. So someone said once, history is not what happened to you. It is what is happening to you and how you react. So most times when we talk about history, people will think of, some years ago. No, what is happening to us. So the scramble for Africa, an intense period of European colonization, began in earnest around the early 1880s and was solidified by 1883. Yes, this process dramatically reshaped Africa's political, social, and economic landscape, like I said a while ago, leaving an impact that is still felt today. Let's take a deep dive. The background, what motivated Europe, to come to Africa and to do all of this. So European nations in the 19th century were experiencing rapid industrial growth and increasing national competition. They saw Africa as a source of valuable resources such as rubber, minerals, and ivory, and even the human beings. Yes, that would fuel their industrial economies. Additionally, colonization was driven by a mix of nationalism, missionary zeal, and a desire for global influence, and European powers justified their actions with a belief in the civilization mission. So we were backwards. We were uncivilized. So they were coming to bring us into the light, as it were. But remember what I told you, 1884. As at 1884, a place like Buguma was already in existence. All right, then. So that is called the mission, the civilization mission. There's a word for it in, I think this is Latin, mission civilizatisch. I think it's a Latin word. Asserting that they were bringing progress, Christianity, and enlightenment to Africa. So the role of the Berlin Conference, 1884 to 1885. While the scramble for Africa was in progress by 1883, it was in 1884 that European leaders formalized their approach at the Berlin Conference, which sought to regulate colonization and trade in Africa and prevent conflict among European powers. No African leaders were invited to this conference. By the end of the conference, European countries agreed on how to carve up Africa, drawing arbitrary borders and disregarded existing ethnic, cultural, and linguistic boundaries. This process intensified European colonization efforts, setting the stage for large-scale resource extraction and exploitation. So this saw the birthing of colonial powers. By 1883, Britain, France, Portugal, Belgium were expanding their influence across various regions. Britain focused on East and Southern Africa, seeking a route from Cape to Cairo to connect its colonies across the continent. France established control in West Africa and Central Africa, aggressively expanding its colonial empire. Portugal and Belgium also held territories. Notably, King Leopold II of Belgium claimed the Congo as his personal fiefdom, leading to one of the most brutal colonial regimes in history. So now, let us look at the impact on African societies. Colonization led to economic exploitation. European powers extracted Africa's resources, often through forced labor. Cash crops were prioritized over local food production, disrupting traditional economies and making many African regions economically dependent. Political fragmentation. The European drawn borders divided ethnic groups and merged rival communities, creating a fractured political landscape. This division sowed seeds of conflict that persisted among other independents, which many African nations struggled with. Border disputes and ethnic tensions rooted in these colonial boundaries. Social and cultural disruption. Colonial administration then forced European education, languages, and religion, often attempting to erode African customs and governance structures. Traditional systems of leadership were frequently replaced by colonial rulers, leading to the loss of indigenous cultural practices and governance. Lasting effect on global politics and African development. 1. Path to independence and decolonization. The effects of colonization set the stage for independence movements of the mid-20th century. Why African nations ultimately gained independence, they were often left with weakened economies, fragmented societies, and infrastructures designed to serve colonial interests rather than local needs. Economic legacies and structural challenges. The emphasis on resources extraction and monoculture economies left Africa heavily reliant on few exports, a structure that has made economic diversification and growth challenging even today. Modern conflicts and political challenges, the artificial boundaries and division imposed by the European colonizers are central to many modern African conflicts. Nations with diverse ethnic groups, often forced into single states, have faced internal struggles for power, resources, and identity. So, global influence and awareness. The scramble for Africa shaped international views on race, imperialism, and human rights, prompting later governments and advocating for decolonization, racial equality, and reparations. The widespread documentation of the brutal conditions in colonies such as the Congo exposed the human cost of imperialism and helped galvanize early anti-imperialist sentiments globally. In summary, the Scramble for Africa was a key event that reshaped Africa's trajectory, influencing everything from economic policies to social cohesion and international relations. It continues to impact the continent's development and the global political order. So now, looking at the history, all of what we have read so far, I asked myself this question: are we seeing a reputation of this after over a century? Are we seeing a reputation of this? Now, if you look at what is happening globally now, it's like we're seeing a reputation. I will tell you why. Yes, we are seeing a striking parallels between the scramble for Africa and contemporary global dynamics, particularly with Europe's and other global powers increasing influence over African resources and geopolitical strategies. Here are several. Let us look at some areas where we're seeing this replay: economic influence and resource extraction. Now, natural resources. African countries hold vast reserves of valuable minerals, including cobalt, lithium, rare earth elements, essential for green technologies such as batteries for electric vehicles and renewable energy and all that. Major global players, including European nations, China, and the United States, are actively investing in these resources, sometimes engaging in competitive or exploitative practices similar to colonial era practices, infrastructure deals, and debt. Many African nations have, entered into agreements to build infrastructure projects financed by the foreign loans or through resources backed by deals. These arrangements can now lead to dependency and, in some cases, debt traps, where countries are at risk of defaulting and losing control over their assets to foreign powers. Geopolitical competition in Africa. We now see a new scramble. China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRL, European Union partnerships, and the U.S. Proper Africa program are examples of significant investment frameworks targeting African countries. While these initiatives aim to strengthen trade and infrastructure, they are also strategic moves to secure long-term influence in Africa. Military presence and security assistance. Foreign powers, including European nations, have been increasing their military presence in Africa. France, for instance, has long maintained a presence in West Africa, though recent tension and local resistance have led to withdrawals. The presence of US and European military bases, particularly in the Sahel and Horn of Africa, underscores the strategic importance of Africa for securing resources, combating extremism, and protecting shipping lanes. Environmental and climate impact. Land use and agriculture. Large-scale acquisition, often by foreign corporations, has led to concerns about land grabbing, where fertile land is acquired for commercial farming, biofuels, or carbon offsets projects, often at the expense of local communities and food security. This recalls colonial practices where arable land was allocated to export crops rather than meeting food, as in local food needs. Renewable energy and green colonialism. As Europe transitions to renewable energy, African countries have become prime sites for producing materials such as cobalt and lithium, necessary for solar, wind, and battery technologies. However, extraction can be often involve exploitative labor practices, environmental degradation, and limited economic benefits for local communities, which may be seen as a modern form of economic exploitation under the guise of green energy. All right? Am I boring you? I don't think so. I guess I am stirring, your mind, so that we think. Soft power and cultural influence. Educational and cultural programs. European countries are promoting cultural and educational programs to strengthen diplomatic and economic ties in Africa, often using soft power strategies like student exchange programs and cultural centers. While these initiatives provide benefits, they can also shape narrative and foster dependency that serve European interest. Digital influence. Technology giants from Europe, the US, and China are heavily invested in building digital infrastructure across Africa. While this brings advancement, it can also mean loss of data. Yes, data sovereignty and potential monopolization of digital markets, where African nations become consumers rather than controllers of their data and technological future. Modern form of governance influence. So, development aid and policy shaping European nations often tie aid packages to policy requirements, from governance reforms to environmental standards. Why these conditions can promote positive change. They sometimes impose policies, that benefit European interest more than local needs. So this mirrors colonial patterns where European powers dictate terms, albeit with different tools. So now, when you look back at what happened over a century ago, when a group of people from a particular continent came together to discuss the future of Africa without Africans being on the table. Now, they spoke one language, not necessarily the same dialect. What do I mean by one language? The language is, we want to make progress at the expense of the others. They were therefore, I think, from historical information, for over a month, fragmenting the continent of Africa, bringing their opinion and worldview. And when they perfected it, they came and executed it. It takes me back to that Bible story about the Tower of Babel, when a group of people of one language, of one, would I say, a vision, decided to build a tower up to heaven. And God looked down and said, these people are of one mind and of one language. Whatever they decide to do, nothing can happen, as in nobody can take it away from them. So let's go down and break their language. So that was what they did, more or less. So, but now flip it. Over a century, and this influence is still there. And I ask myself this simple question: is it that this thing that happened over a century ago affected the DNA of Africa or Africans, the psyche of Africans, our global view, and our philosophy, that after a century and we are still grappling, fighting, more or less like tied to the apron of this, as in the people that decided our future. We're still fighting with it. So the other day, I had this opportunity of sitting with, I was in this book review arranged by Victor Aliko, a very good friend of the house. He's been on the show before, and a development economist. And we're reviewing this book. I needed to be there. The Bottom Billions, that's the title of the book. So Professor Kingsley Moghalu was there, and he was the one that did what did he do now? The technical review, more or less. So when speaking, he said some things that I picked from that conversation that is so profound to this conversation on the show. When you look at Africa, Nigeria, any of the African countries, he asked this simple question: what is our global view? As an African, as a Nigerian, do we have a global view? What is our philosophy? These guys came together with their global view, forced or foisted, it's forced more or less on us and fragmented us. So the question is, do we have a global view? Do we have a philosophy? Because they had a global view. And what was the global view? To prolong, yes, their productivity. And for that to happen, they were looking for resources, both human and otherwise. But you know what I'm talking about. So the average African on the streets of Africa cannot talk to himself and his brother having that global view. What do I mean by global view? Now, how do we conceptualize time in Nigeria? Kairos or Chronos, as the case may be. How do we see time? Go and ask an European, how do you see time? I remember sometime in, I think that was when I was in, is it SS1 or SS2 or JS1 or JS2? I can't remember the particular timing now, but I remember what happened then. Billionaire John Soros, is it John or George Soros now, had a plan for Europe, 50 million American dollars to train Europeans for the future. That was like 20 or 30 years ago. I was still in secondary school. I remember just to train Europeans. Emmanuel Macron, I wonder how old he was then. Definitely he was part of that package. Call their names. Angela Merkel and the rest of them, they were part of that project. So there's a global view. They have discussed it. Strategically, they've positioned it. So let me bring you on something, the way I reason. When you look at the future, like, you know, we always think the future is one destination we're traveling to, one place, somewhere in, when you get to the end of the world, you turn right. Maybe that's where the future is. Actually, that isn't the future. The future is you living. So 20 years from now, we don't have, let's assume, certain, projections into 20 years. So you now say every child that will be born as at today, today, 2024, November, today is 5th. So 20 years from now, if we project that we are going to go to Mars 20 years from today, it means all the children who are born today will be factored into that program. And we're going to engineer the atmosphere around them. We're going to condition them. We're going to create that, those parameters that as they are born, right from kindergarten, elementary, secondary, university, they are being programmed towards that. So if you look at it from the point of view of research, so out of every 10, the likelihood of 2 to pull through will be what? 90%. That's true. It's like guessing. You want to say, you remember when Jesus was born, or before he came, the stars, the Magi, they were not 3. People say 3 wise men. It's not true. They were more than 3. When they came, they said something that is so profound. They studied the stars, that a king is to be born. So it was a conscious practice then to study what will come. Not looking into, like you want to say, no, they looked inwards into themselves and projected into the future. The same thing happened during, if you look at the story of Moses, when Moses was born, when Pharaoh said they should kill this number to that number, the likelihood for you to kill the Messiah will be 99.999%. So what is our global view as a country, as a people? So when I heard him speak those words, our philosophy, what is our philosophy? They created a system. So you see, they created a system. And the way they did the system, I'm talking about the Belgian conference when they were balkanizing Africa. The system is, we will be subject. Them, I'm talking about the people who created it. Like, these laws will govern our process. So we are not going to go above the law. We're going to be underneath the law. We're going to hold ourselves accountable. So they created that system. They created a process. So when you build a system around people, people would respond to the system. But when you build a system, as in people around a system, not the system around the people, people begin to circumvent the system. They distort it and destroy it. Guys, I think we need to sit down as Africans, human beings in this part of the world, and ask ourselves these crucial questions. Yes, ask ourselves. I'm not talking about, these guys spoke one language, like I said. The language they spoke here was the language of progress. They had different dialects, but they spoke one language. So what is our global language? I'm Nigerian and I'm proud of it. But do you know what? More often than not, I see that we don't speak the language of progress. We speak the language of division. We speak the language of schisms. We speak the language of us versus them. And every day we see ourselves fighting. The worst enemy you can have is not an invasion. The worst enemy you can have is from within. When you doubt yourself, when you disbelieve yourself, because you were told. So guys, this is what I came to do on the show today. Just to provoke you in a positive light, and you look at it. Yes, in a positive light, you look at it. Do we have a future? Yes. How bright is it? So bright. Blinding bright. But first of all, we must define our global outlook and have our global philosophy well presented. Well, I wish I could continue talking and all of that, but this is what I came to do on the show today. Thank you for being there. Hope this has brought some level of illumination to that darkness around you. Yep. Before I go, I want to encourage you. Please follow us. I'm not used to this, but I have to get used to it. Like, follow us on all of our social media handles: X, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Go ahead, follow us for amazing thoughts. And again, our YouTube channel. Yes, go like, drop a comment, and subscribe. It's always exciting when I see you make those comments, because the truth is, it gives me joy. The reason why I always come into this space largely is because of you listening to me, watching this very hour. All right, guys, I'm so grateful for this opportunity, and I have to end it here. But don't worry, I'll be back. We'll be back. We have so much to share with you this period. Like I said a while ago, historical information that will provoke you in living purposefully. Till I come your way again. You know how we say it on the show. My name is Amachree Isoboye. Bye for now.